Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who is baffled by poor digital security practices in sports, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. I'm Sean Callanan, and welcome to episode 380 of Sports Geek. This week, I chat with Andy Burt. He's the digital content manager at New Zealand Rugby. Remember, always, you can email me, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com, or on socials at Sean Callanan or at SportsGeek on most platforms. I'm actually looking forward to taking the Digital Dollars workshops on the road, either for private or public workshops. Please reach out if you're interested in either for your team across the digital data sponsorship. What we look to do is help your partners activate across your digital audiences, and guess what happens out of that? You grow revenue. That is exactly what Digital Dollars is. Please reach out. Sean Callanan at SportsGeek is how you can find me. Please head to SportsGeek HQ for this episode or any episode of the 380. This episode will be at sportsgeekhq.com/380. Please enjoy my chat with Andy Burt, the digital content manager at New Zealand Rugby. Very happy to welcome Andy Burt. He's the digital content manager for New Zealand Rugby. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for the call up, Sean. Glad to be on the show.
Not a problem at all. I always start asking people how they got their start in sports. You actually got your start in sports in cricket. You want to sort of take us through, I guess, your initial foray into the world of sports?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go kind of way back for this one. I think I've had a bit of an unconventional kind of journey into sports. So please stop me if I'm boring at any point in time. But we'll go way back to being a little kid and growing up. Oh, there goes my cat in the background. Growing up in New Zealand, I think like most kids actually kind of wanted to be an All Black, or had an aspiration to be an All Black or a Black Cap, which is our national cricket team. But realised pretty early on in the piece, look, I'm just not good enough. I came to terms with that pretty early on in the piece, so it's not going to happen.
There's a lot of listeners now nodding, having a similar story. Wanted to play on the pitch of the court, and then realised that's not my talent. Anyway, right. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, absolutely. I realised that pretty early on. So my path kind of took another direction. Growing up in Wellington, New Zealand, we're immersed in a real creative culture here. So Peter Jackson, born and raised here. Lord of the Rings is filmed here. A couple hundred metres down the road from where we're talking right now, James Cameron's shooting Avatar 3. This is kind of where we live in Wellington. So I wanted to be a filmmaker, and more specifically a screenwriter. So I went to film school, graduated, I sold a feature film script, and I spent a couple of years working, developing various projects. None of them ever got made, but I was working part-time on that, doing other odds and ends of jobs, but not really making a living. So I was at a bit of a crossroads here. So what do? I need a viable career path now. Screenwriting's not panning out for me. What do I love? Well, I love sport. What am I marginally good at? Writing. Combine the two, sports journalism came out of the pot. So I studied sports journalism at Massey University in Wellington, graduated, got a role working on Skywatch magazine. Now, Sky in New Zealand is our main pay TV provider. So I was managing the sports editorial in that magazine. It had a distribution of about 1 million households in New Zealand, which is massive for a country of 4.5, 5 million people. So spent a year doing that, loved it, was immersed in sport for the year. And then, like most young journalists, I sold my soul and moved into comms for better pay. So I moved back to Wellington. The Sky job was based in Auckland, and spent the next few years working in comms across various government departments. However, I was not really fulfilled in those roles. I was kind of yearning for an opportunity back in sport. And a real kind of sliding doors moment came at the end of 2013. I saw a job advertisement for effectively a social media producer on the Cricket World Cup, which is being hosted in New Zealand and Australia in 2015. And, back in 2013, it wasn't common to see social media roles advertised. So I went for it, thought I'd no hope. And I think just my overwhelming passion, enthusiasm, and knowledge of cricket probably got me through the door. Now, one thing working on big events like that I soon realised was most of the people that work on these projects, they go from event to event, World Cup to World Cup, Olympic Games to Commonwealth Games. So you're not necessarily cricket fans, right? And I think that's where I kind of came into my own passionate cricket follower, cricket supporter, cricket player. So it was an incredible 18 months working across that tournament, working really closely with a guy called Andrew Leonard from the ICC based in Dubai. We also worked with a whole crew from Cricket Australia in Melbourne. And it was just incredible, right? We smashed out this amazing tournament. 6 weeks of the tournament were absolutely incredible. When you've got places like India, Pakistan, huge populations, and cricket's like a religion to them, right? Anything we were putting up, didn't matter what the piece of content was, it was going berserk. Back in those days, it was all organic reach, no paid spend. Content was going wild. It was an amazing World Cup that kind of captured the imagination of both New Zealand and Australia. World Cup final was New Zealand and Australia. We won't talk about the result, but to have the two host nations reach a World Cup final was kind of the dream for a tournament. So incredible tournament. And then when the tournament finished, it was like from 100 miles an hour to nothing, all of a sudden, no job.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, because you're in the world of, government and government comms and government advising, and then, making that leap into sport. And, passion is a big part of it. But do you think the fact that you had that compressed schedule and that peak time of a major tournament like a Cricket World Cup, it was like a sports digital accelerator to a certain degree for yourself? Like you had the passion and you had the writing skills, but iron sharpens iron. You're working with a whole bunch of different operators, and you're right. Those sports event people do jump from event to event, but they know when the first ball's bowled, it's game on. Was that a really is it like an accelerator for sports digital?
100%. I think you've knocked the nail on the head there. 100%. I think what you learn, even within the space of the 6-week tournament, is what you'd pack into a couple of years in a normal job, right? It was just absolutely fast-paced. One day we'd be in Melbourne MCG on a game, then we'd be in Perth the next day, then flying to Auckland for another game. You're on the go, you're working non-stop, you're pitch side for some amazing moments. You had to think on your feet, you had to think fast. The incredible moments that you need to capture and put out to audience of millions of people. So it was fast-paced, we were learning on the go. And you've got at your fingertips, you've got, back then it was, obviously Twitter was huge, but you've got all the key contacts from these various social media agencies at your fingertips to their news, and they're wanting to debut their latest and biggest and greatest thing. So it exactly was that. It was an accelerator. It was just this whirlwind 6-week tournament, but 18 months overall working on it. But the tournament itself was just craziness. And I think the experience you gain from that kind of sets you up for years in the sports industry for sure. Yeah.
And so you obviously got a taste for sport then, and figured I've found my tribe, I've found the thing that I want to do. And then soon after you ended up at New Zealand Rugby. For those who don't know, just give us an explainer for what New Zealand Rugby is and what it entails across New Zealand, and then sort of start to touch on a brand that everyone would know, the All Blacks. What does your role at New Zealand Rugby entail?
Yeah, so effectively New Zealand Rugby, the organisation administers rugby in New Zealand. That's from grassroots right through to the very highest level. So it's obviously the most popular sport in New Zealand certainly in terms of viewership. In terms of player numbers, been very strong over a very long period of time. When we look at our high-level teams, our All Blacks and Black Ferns, they are the most successful men's and women's rugby teams in the history of the game. 9 Rugby World Cups they've won between those two teams. The highest winning rate of any team in rugby, certainly. And then in global sport, the Black Ferns, our women's team, have a winning rate up around 90%, the All Blacks up around 70%. So it goes beyond rugby. They are the most successful sporting teams in the world. Come from this little old country called New Zealand in the bottom of the earth, 5 million people. Why are we so successful at this game we call rugby? So it's quite incredible stories to be told there. But New Zealand Rugby, it administers the game in New Zealand. We hold many, of course, national teams. So beyond the All Blacks and Black Ferns, we've got our Sevens teams that travel the world. Our age group teams, our Māori All Blacks, are steeped in history and tradition as well. And then competitions, so Super Rugby, which involves Australian teams as well, and teams from the Pacific, Fiji and Moana Pacifica, and then numerous domestic competitions across New Zealand. So rugby in New Zealand is now, it's not a winter sport, it's 12 months a year, it does not stop. Every month of the year, there's a team playing, there's an action, there's training and pre-season, there's always something happen. Rugby just goes 12 months a year, so it's a pretty big beast to get into, New Zealand Rugby.
And it's a really strong contrast to, I guess, that long planning period and then peak activity period of the World Cup to going to a sport that has a really wide remit, like you said, the petition, that wide basis of grassroots, but then the the top tier with the All Blacks and Black Ferns at the very top. It isn't quite that frenetic pace that is, a 3-week or a 6-week cricket tournament. So how was it, I guess, adjusting to that, going from that really chaotic, but, planned chaos, if you want to say, of a Cricket World Cup to, what does, and I'm sure the 12-month calendar that you've got now probably wasn't a 12-month calendar when you turned up in 2016. That would have been something that, like a lot of sports, are looking to, how do we make our sport year-round and not just seasonal?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's, when you look at a Cricket World Cup that will win 6 weeks, I think it's just on a kind of lesser scale with rugby. So you'll go through various campaigns. So generally the way the rugby calendar works is you've got Super Rugby, which runs from, say, February through to June, and then your international season starts. That's when the All Blacks and Black Ferns come in. And they'll have a mid-year tournament, Rugby Championship, for example, with the All Blacks. And then you go later into the year where you go into the international overseas games where they go on a Northern Tour. So effectively they go from June all the way until the end of November, really. And then interspersed in between that, you've got sevens tournaments, which are played all around the world. Sevens is now an Olympic sport, of course, so it takes on a much more importance now, sevens globally. We've seen the rise also of countries like USA, China now putting bigger influence and bigger stake into sevens rugby because it's an Olympic sport. So, yeah, effectively, the way you don't have this big whirlwind 6 weeks. It is a little bit more controlled, but it is just on a smaller scale, and just spread out over a longer period of time. But again, it is very comparable and doesn't really stop.
But also having that, I guess, length and that time lets you sort of go back to your original passion and your original piece of that in film, screenwriting, documentaries, short form storytelling. Has that been something that you've really been, eager and really pleased to be able to get your teeth into at New Zealand Rugby?
Yeah, 100%. So for the first, 6 years at New Zealand Rugby, I was managing social media channels, which was 12 months of the year. It doesn't stop. Grassroots all the way through to the highest level. But now I've moved over to NZR Plus, which is this little logo here. So NZR Plus is our streaming platform at New Zealand Rugby. We launched in August last year, just before the World Cup. It's a free platform. We effectively want to take rugby content to the world. We want to showcase New Zealand Rugby, the history, heritage, traditions of our teams, what makes our teams so successful, tell our stories. But wider than that, just open up rugby on a global scale. So when we look at our streamers across the world, rugby doesn't really feature. We've got a Netflix doc on the Six Nations. Aside from that, there's not a lot out there. So there's a void we want to fill and just provide rugby content to the world. So a big part of that is telling stories, which is kind of my background. So we've got original documentaries on our All Blacks. We're opening the curtain on All Blacks like never seen before. It's one of the more sacred and guarded teams in global sport. And right now we've got documentaries which really lift the curtain, show what makes that team tick behind the scenes. Things that have never been seen before. A couple of years ago, you couldn't have even fathomed the kind of access you'd have to the All Blacks. Now we've got it on NZR Plus, and the same said with the Black Ferns, our women's team as well. So we're looking to tell all these stories at the moment, spread the gospel of rugby around the world. We're working with various production companies and content creators to help tell these stories and reach different audiences. So for me, that's the most exciting aspect now, is storytelling and getting rich and deep on these stories to take to the world.
So there's a few things there. I mean, creating NZR Plus, which is, for the first thing, it's a free streaming platform, which is sort of the opposite of a lot of the other, building out your streamers and, it's going to be a revenue builder. Was it primarily that, growth message? And then obviously, the geek and the data geek inside me also goes, well, there's a data piece there and you're starting to get better information on some of those audiences, but it really, really sort of generated from a growth position and looking to grow audiences both in New Zealand, but more likely internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely a growth proposition. And, the data, of course, is an important aspect of that. And perhaps, as we grow bigger and bigger, that will become even more important. But at the outset, it's purely a growth mechanism. So New Zealand has a population of 5 million people. It's our number one sport here. But if we look at rugby globally, according to the IOC, there's 500 million people identify as rugby fans. So it's 495 million people outside of New Zealand. And when you look at the All Blacks and Black Ferns being the biggest brand in the game, there's a huge opportunity for us to capture a lot of those audiences. And we thought the best way to do it was to build this free platform and provide great free content to the world and really grow the sport globally. Yeah, and the other thing we're doing at NZR Plus is we're taking rugby to dark markets around the world for free. So that's markets around the world that don't have a broadcast deal. And we're talking some pretty big markets. India, for example, Sri Lanka, China, Portugal, Netherlands. So if they don't have a broadcast deal for, say, Super Rugby, we're reaching our finals this weekend, or All Blacks Test matches, we'll take it to those markets for free. So we're just introducing rugby to more and more people around the world. We want to grow fandom in this game. We see a huge opportunity to really capture that. There's 500 million people around the world that identify as fans, to bring them into the tent. And also, not only that, I'm sure there's more fans out there to be discovered of this great game of rugby.
And from a initial build point of view, how much of it was archive content and that you had and was a bit of an aggregator and tagging and all those things? So it has theirs, it's similar to why Disney created Disney Plus. They had a whole back catalogue, and that's why a lot of people. But then the thing is to also be producing new content to drive people in. How do you sort of keep that cadence going?
Yeah, and it's a real mix of both, right? Like, I think in terms of our archive, I think that's such a strong piece. And we've got a partner actually based in Melbourne, where you live, Inverleigh, who we work with. So they've got access to our archive. And we produced a whole bunch of, base content to fill out the platform. So things like we'll create short films on moments in time. It's in 1992, the All Blacks played a centenary series against the World 15. Now, this was a 3-test series, involved all the greatest players from around the world. And that series hadn't seen the light of day since 1992. It was on free-to-air TV in New Zealand, had never been screened since then. It's been locked away in an archive. So we got a hold of those 3 games. We produced a documentary on that. There's a great piece of archival content for the platform. They've been running through our highlight packages over the course of 30 plus years, creating various packages. We've got ex-players sitting them down in a room, interviewing them about moments in time. So basically, it's a whole big archival project which has filled out about 100 hours of just archival content alone. Remixed archive, which fans haven't seen for many years, that fills out the platform. And then on top of that, we've got what we'd call premium original content, where we've last year being a World Cup year as well. Of course, a lot of this was World Cup focused. But we've got someone like a Taika Waititi, who is a Hollywood director, rugby fan himself, former rugby player. We got him to travel throughout France and do Taika's rugby road trip throughout France, and we put that on the platform. So really have a big pull to go beyond rugby and reach a much wider audience, which Taika does. We had our All Blacks and Black Ferns behind-the-scenes documentaries. We have Richie McCaw sit down with Thierry Dusautoir, who is, the former French legend. They sat down and talked about their France versus All Blacks rivalry, things like that. So we really fill it out with our premium original content, balanced out with our archival content. And also beyond that, we just pulled in a whole bunch of licensed content, things like rugby adjacent content, kids content, reality shows which feature rugby elements, all this type of stuff, just to really provide a great variety of content for audiences. So it doesn't matter if you're a rugby fan or not, we've got content on there that will appeal to anyone globally.
And the early returns on NZR Plus, are you happy with what it looks like in the first couple of years?
Yeah, and interesting. So we've only been up and running for 9 months, but one thing we quickly did realise, if we're talking about kind of lessons, it's not necessarily a case of you put something on a platform and people are just going to turn up and start watching it, right? We're in a crowded space in the streaming platform. We're an entertainment proposition. We're a Disney Plus, we're a Netflix, right? And although people aren't handing over money, it's still another streaming platform. You have to sign up. You've got to download an app and all that. So you're not necessarily having people like a like of a button on a Facebook page, right? It's not that easy. So what we're finding is that, hey, we need to also put content where people are. So our YouTube channel is now becoming a bigger source of content release to reach much wider audiences. But what we're seeing on NZR Plus is quite a rich return of viewership. When people get into the platform, they're getting deep into that platform. They're seeing the depth of content and they're returning and they're watching more and more and they're kind of getting lost in the rabbit warren of NZR Plus. So that's really great to see that content is appealing to people. They're going deep, they're discovering content that we're not necessarily pushing on the banner. People are just suddenly just discovering certain pieces of content on the platform. So that's really, really heartening to see.
I think it's really interesting. I've seen a few, both leagues and teams sort of, go to a paywall model, which this is a form of, even if it's a data paywall, and and then there's a launch happens and it's sort of like the wall comes down and the fans are just expected to scale that wall and live over there because that's where your best content is. But that spread of where your content lives and where, how long your teaser is and how long you're trying to bring people into other pieces. Different platforms have, different consumption patterns and those kind of things. That's the bit that was interesting to me. Like, I guess early on when you've, first done the launch and you've got a nice big documentary, you go, oh, cool, we'll put it behind NZR Plus. But then what are those pieces of content that end up on social where you've got those big audiences? The All Blacks have a, massive presence on multiple social platforms. Has that been sort of something that you've learned and been constantly testing to go, oh, there's a real emotional moment from a video that really works as an Instagram reel or a YouTube short? And if that pull and that emotional tie is enough, like, people will come across, because the cost is not that high. Like, giving up an email address to sign up, it isn't that high. But then, like you said, you're finding that you got people in and they sort of fall into that rabbit hole of being recommended other pieces or finding archival footage or remembering a match that they might have went to many years ago.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate goal, to bring people over to NZR Plus and discover that great content on there. And look, I think we're learning a lot as we go, and we'll continue to learn. But if we look at our All Blacks in Their Own Words documentary, season 1 was released before the World Cup last year, and largely that was behind an NZR Plus wall, but we weren't kind of reaching the numbers we'd love to, and also the numbers that deserve that quality of production. So we've kind of learned from that this year, and we're putting a lot more out. There's a lot more teasers going on social channels, a lot more of those emotional clip moments, as you alluded to. Those are being plastered across our channels. But also what we're doing is, right now you can watch all 4 episodes on NZR Plus, but now we're staggering them in full on YouTube as well. So they're premiering on YouTube over the space of a couple of weeks. So you can catch those on YouTube, but ideally, you jump on now, you can watch them on NZR Plus ad-free. Of course, YouTube is monetized with ads. But it's exactly that. We're kind of learning as we're going. We're putting a lot more out there for fans, utilizing our vertical platforms 100%. It's where you really reach scale of fan through vertical platforms, but then you get your richer engagement and your longer form landscape content, which is what we're finding on YouTube and NZR Plus, where the watch time is, of course, magnified much longer. And that really is the end goal, to bring people over and get that deep engagement with people on the longer form content.
And are you watching how other streamers, whether they be the big ones like Netflix or other ones that are sort of indie and sort of building out their own piece? One that I keep an eye on is an indie built one called Nebula. I watch Jetlag the Game every week on YouTube. It's a fun show, and they pretty much put the show on YouTube a week after it is on Nebula. And so the last 5 minutes is always, hey, if you want the next episode, it's sitting there, and it's a really good tease promotion. I'm sure they are, converting different people. Are you looking for different little, I guess they're conversion hacks and ways to sort of keep that funnel moving along?
Yeah, and I think that's a great tip. Like, I'd never heard of Nebula, but now I'm going to go check that out, because I think that's going to be a great way for us to, get some new ideas. Because if we look at a Netflix, it's hard to be comparable to a Netflix that can kind of break all the rules. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily like what Netflix do is probably not going to work for us. So I think someone like the outfit you just mentioned is going to be more comparable. So 100%, I'm more looking at the streamers that are not the Netflix level, but the level down, and seeing what works for those streamers. So absolutely, but it is more about now giving away more for free and giving away more of those teasers and tasters, and then they come to NZR Plus for the full meal, right? And also just connecting with some of our free-to-air partners in New Zealand. So in Their Own Words, that's going to be free-to-air on Sky Open, which will go out to the whole of New Zealand in a couple of weeks' time. And that puts the NZR Plus brand across to the whole country as well. So looking to work with free-to-air partners as well in New Zealand and across the world, as well as our platform, NZR Plus.
I mean, and that's the thing. NZR Plus gives you that backstop for all your content. So you can still be doing content deals with free-to-air partners, other streaming partners, other places around the world, and going, oh, cool, you can have first run, but NZR is also going to be here. So it does give you another platform to play with, and then as that platform grows and the data grows, you sort of have better ability to be able to potentially commercialize that, but at least know what the growth looks like. Looking at that NZR Plus as a growth strategy, but also just like I said, a data and a opportunity. What are some of the? I look at the All Blacks, and I know most people who are listening know the global brand that it is. In New Zealand, everyone is a fan of the All Blacks, there is, domestically, I compare the All Blacks in New Zealand, similar to the NFL. In Australia, it's got all of its fans, and there's not much wiggle room for growth, which does push beyond your borders and look at an international focus. This NZR is part of it, but is there also particular key markets that are, I guess, important to you from a fan growth point of view?
Yeah, for sure. And looking at that, that 500 million fans across the world, so there's certainly some key markets there, and I'll pinpoint a couple now, but one is most certainly USA. And if you look at USA, they're on a real upward trend with rugby at the moment. So the Olympics are coming up in a couple of years' time in LA, and sevens is, of course, an Olympic sport. And then we've got a Men's Rugby World Cup in 2031 and a Women's World Cup in 2033. And you've got Major League Rugby is growing, their professional sporting league, their rugby league. So rugby's on an upward trend there. So from our perspective, we look at this as an opportunity to get into that fan base in America. For us, we see NFL as being a really, if you're a fan of NFL, there's potential you can be a fan of rugby and the All Blacks as well. So we call it a young American sports enthusiast, sports junkies, we call it. That's the kind of audience we're targeting. And we could produce the greatest content in the world for that audience, right, and put it out on NZR Plus. And they're never going to see it, let's be honest, right? So how do we reach that audience? So one way we reach an audience is by working with content creators who already have those audiences. And one of those we've just worked with recently is Dude Perfect. So Dude Perfect have 60 million followers on YouTube alone, very young skew, American skew, of course. Their content is such a crucial and important audience for us. So we caught wind recently that they were coming down under to film a down under bucket list. So we invited them over to New Zealand for 2 days to hang out with our rugby stars and learn about New Zealand, learn about our culture, our food, the game of rugby, and have some pretty cool experiences as well. So we had the crew down in Queenstown, which is the adventure capital of the day, for 2 days. We flew some of our rugby greats down there. We had Richie McCaw, who's the all-time great rugby player, double Rugby World Cup winner, most capped All Black of all time. He's the Tom Brady of rugby, but not only that, he's a helicopter pilot. So you get the Tom Brady of rugby, but he's also flying them around in the helicopter. We had Kendra Coxhead, the greatest, most decorated rugby women's player of all time, and then a number of other players down there, including Piri Wepu, who has taught the dudes the haka, and he's led the All Blacks haka more than any All Black of all time. So a great crew down there, 2 amazing days, filming amazing content. The dudes were absolutely incredible, just on the whole time, generally into it, generally talented as well in terms of picking up a rugby ball and learning how to throw it, doing some pretty cool tricks, doing some high-octane activities. It's an amazing couple of days, and that piece went out 2 weeks ago on Dude Perfect's channels, has reached millions and millions of people. For example, we had one Instagram reel, has reached over 7 million, had over 7 million views. And it's quite a basic reel. It's just uncut. The dude's just throwing a rugby ball. 7 million people, right? And it just shows you the strength of working with content creators like that. So that's how we're looking at reaching those audiences, working with content creators around the world who already hold those big audiences and collaborating with them on projects.
And I guess the advantage for you when approaching those content creators is the power of the All Blacks brand. They've got some recognition. They understand the history behind it. And I'm sure the Dude Perfect guys would have jumped at the chance when you've reached out. Is it really looking for something that works for them and their audiences as much as you want to reach and connect with their audience? You've got to also be bringing some value, with the IP, with access to players like Richie, or to facilities and those kind of things.
100%. It's a really an exchange of IP, and it's that connection with the All Blacks and the Black Ferns, those global sporting icon teams that we have. We've fortunately got the advantage of doing that. If we're all due respect to the New Zealand pickleball team, but if we're the New Zealand pickleball team, right, of course you've got no chance, right? But as the All Blacks, it's amazing the kind of doors that opens, and formerly working in the social space. If we wanted to contact someone globally, it was amazing what a message from the All Blacks Instagram account would do, a DM. I'm talking messaging someone like a Jason Momoa would instantly message back, "Oh my God, I can't believe the All Blacks are messaging me," things like that. So it's amazing what the power of that brand will do and the doors it will open in association. So 100% for Dude Perfect, they were just as excited as we were about this opportunity to work with the All Blacks and Black Ferns, So it's amazing the doors that will open, and we're looking at ways we can harness that now across the world with other big creators for sure.
And then when you're workshopping and with them, like they obviously were coming down under to do, a bit of a bucket list and all these different things around Australia, and wanted to tick off a bunch of things like, Lord of the Rings sets and hang out with the All Blacks and do that kind of stuff. then from your point of view, how do you get that balance right of we want to show some stuff with the guys at Dude Perfect, but really it's their content, and their content will be the feature and will be the main thing for their audience. But we want to have a few pieces for our fans and also something else to welcome the Dude Perfect fans across to our channels. What were some of the things that you were looking for when you were sort of breaking down that opportunity?
Yeah, and that's where we're really blessed, right? Because it's Dude Perfect's piece of content. It was called a Down Under bucket list. It was New Zealand and Australia. So, New Zealand and the All Blacks segment and the Blackfin segment could have been a minute, for all we know. We had no control over that, but it ended up being a good half of the whole episode was based on their experience in New Zealand and hanging out with our rugby stars. So, look, we're really fortunate. We just presented some ideas to the dudes in terms of what they could do down in Queenstown, and they really just leapt at everything. They said, it sounds amazing. We want to do all of it, but we want to go to Hobbiton as well. We said, well, you're only in New Zealand for 2 days. Queenstown is a long way from Hobbiton, if you know where New Zealand is, right? It's you can't do them both in 2 days. So they sent 4 dudes to Queenstown. We had two days with the 4 dudes doing all sorts of stuff, and they sent 1 lone dude to Hobbiton to do that piece. That was the way to make it work. So the other thing is with the dudes, and this is my first experience of working with YouTubers of that level, and I'm not sure what it'll be like with others, but they were so open in terms of bringing us into their tent for 2 days. So we had 2 of our own videographers and social media producers there who were just, they could have shot anything. They said, have your cameras on, shoot anything. You can do anything you want with that content, as long as, they have eyes on it, right? So that's where we could produce all the behind-the-scenes content, interviews. When there's a down moment, we'd grab the dudes, interview them, chat with them. So we've still got a whole bunch of content that we can still put out. So not only did we have the banner, the hero piece on Dude Perfect's channels, we've got tons of content that we can put out ourselves. So on NZR Plus right now, we've got a whole banner of behind-the-scenes content with Dude Perfect. So I think the beauty of it from our point of view was that we were allowed to really go into the tent and go behind the scenes and capture all that great content with the dudes over those 2 days.
Yeah, and I think that's the key bit for me there is, make your best pitch. There is no guarantee that it's going to be featured, but if they're engaged with their content, they know their audience. And you provide them with, tremendous opportunities to do something that will look great on their content, then you will feature. And then hopefully some of that content some of those fans will flow across. But it's a good piece when, working with influencers, understanding what they're trying to do in that content creator space, because they've got pressure to make the next video awesome, show them doing cool things. So, you got to understand, I guess, the pressure that they're under as well.
Yeah, and the thing for them is they're so used to doing things on the fly and changing things at the last minute if need to be. So the thing for me is I was so concerned about the forecast leading into that. If you look at it, it was just beautiful 2 days, beautiful blue sky. It looked amazing. But if it was pouring with rain, we would have had to change plans. We had a backup plan, but it, perhaps wouldn't have been the same, right? But for them, they were so laxed on that because they do things on the fly. They run and gun. So they almost thrive in those opportunities where they get thrown a curveball. And that's what they're telling us beforehand. We were being as well organised as we could, but they were saying, hey, listen, if something doesn't go according to plan, we roll with it and we can flip on a dime and do things here and we'll make the most of those situations. So it's a real positive mindset in that regard, which was so cool to experience.
But it is something that sometimes, when you're working with, managers or upper management and people trying to convince them what this opportunity is, and you turn up on the day and something's not there, and, they're creative folk, they change, they know what they're doing, but to have that flexibility, which, sport normally does, but sometimes when you take on an opportunity with a content creator, it can be, oh, we really need this to work. It's like, well, we have to trust their process as well as your process. The best things can be planned, but sometimes the best content it does come up in the moment.
That's right. And that they kind of cited a story before they came to New Zealand, and they were shooting a piece of content with Steph Curry, name drop. And they landed to film this piece of content, and then they got a call saying this was around the time the assistant coach had literally passed away. And they said the content shoots off, but this is part of their schedule. So they had to flip on a dime and they filmed something in the airport, I think it was. And, it has millions of views, they just created something on the spot. So it's kind of what they're used to doing, but we're just fortunate. We had a watertight plan for 2 days. We had a wet weather plan. So we had everything kind of all our ducks lined up, which you have to do. But just to see these guys in action is pretty incredible. And I think they just thrive under those pressure situations. It's amazing how they just turn it on when the camera's on. those dudes. It's almost like they're extroverted introverts, if you know what I mean. Like, as soon as the camera goes on, they're just full on. They're the people you see on camera, but off, they do shy away a little bit, I think they just release all that energy, and they just save it up for when the camera's on. But to be fair, the camera's on most of the time.
Yeah, so always interesting in diving in some of those people pieces, and I guess that content piece, and interesting to see, some of that extra content will end up on NZR, give it that broader attraction. And again, if someone is now a burgeoning rugby fan and also follows Do Perfect, that might be the reason that gets them on, because they want to watch that extra content. And then who knows? The bit that I did want to ask, and you sort of talked about NZR and doing those deeper dive documentaries and lifting the curtain. One of the things that I guess is absolutely required if you want to be doing those things, sort of speaking to different documentary makers and sort of that type of style, is actually having buy-in from the high performance team, from the coaching team, from the players, building that trust with the players on what you're filming, how you're going to present them. How has that journey been with you and your team to build that trust, to be able to sort of make those deep emotional connections in the documentaries?
Yeah, and I think trust is 100% the key word, right? It's all about trust, and the team and the management knowing the people who are in camp. So I'll give an example. There was a documentary filmed with the All Blacks back in 2017 during the Lions series. It's on Amazon, and it was an American crew came over. They didn't really have the trust of the team, so the team remained quite guarded. And the style with American and New Zealanders all, the different personalities, different ways of doing things. But the American crew, they'll just have a camera and be watching, right? And then the American sports, they just embrace that. But whereas the New Zealand teams, we're a little bit more guarded. What's the camera doing over there, So they're kind of not their true selves. So this time around, it was about having a crew that they know and trust. So the crew trusted, had spent a couple of years with the team. They know the players well, they know the management well, and they have that buy-in to capture that content. And really, the players are really opening up and capturing those moments that otherwise they'd be more guarded about, and perhaps were, 6 years earlier during the Amazon documentary. So it was all about trust. But I think just talking about the most recent series, All Blacks in Their Own Words, which covers the highs and lows of the 2023 World Cup, which is now live on NZR+, we see a vulnerability from the players which has perhaps never been seen before, the way they open up. So just to kind of explain for fans, so the All Blacks were largely written off before the World Cup. We'd had a couple of shaky years leading into the tournament. We were no longer ranked number one. We had lost heavily to South Africa before the tournament began. We lost our opening game of the tournament to France in Paris. We scraped through to the quarterfinals, playing Ireland, who had just beat us in a series the year before, first time they'd beat us. They'd had the wood on us for a number of years. They were world ranked number one. We're written off. We played this amazing epic quarterfinal where we won in the last minute. We won our semi-final, made a final against South Africa, the defending champions, written off there again. We had our captain red-carded, so sent off very early on in the game. We had to play with 14 players. Pretty much at that point, the game was over. You cannot win a game against the world champions with 14 players. We scrapped at the very end. We scored a try. We'd a try disallowed. We'd shots a goal to win. We ended up losing the game by just 1 point. That's how close we got to winning the World Cup with 14 players. But the team came home proud. The nation was proud of the efforts and what they'd done. So this really opens the curtain, and that really brings the players' emotions to the forefront, looking back at those lows. Sam Cane reflecting on that red card moment as the captain. You're seeing them open up like you've never seen before. And I think beyond the metrics, beyond the views, beyond the reach, beyond all that stuff that we're judged on, for me, what I'm most proud of is the way these players are showing their true selves, their vulnerability, and opening up. And I think in New Zealand, we've got a problem with men's mental health, and I think it's globally as well. In New Zealand, we're a country born from the land. We're a rural farming society. Our men are stoic. We don't talk about our issues. And I think to see All Blacks, the toughest, roughest men in the country, for them to display their emotions, to open up, to show their true feelings, I think that's going to do a lot. And for other people that are kind of out there battling, this shows you, hey, you can open up too. You can talk about what you're going through in your life, because the All Blacks are doing it. They're really setting the example. And I think for mental health worldwide, I think it's going to have a big impact what we're seeing these players do, really opening up and showing their vulnerabilities. So that's what I'm most proud of, beyond any kind of metric, view count or anything like that. We're seeing All Blacks open up like we've never seen before. So that's so cool.
And, I mean, if you're sitting down to plan a documentary that's something that you might aspire to? Like, when through the process did you start seeing, I guess, that real emotion and opening up happen? Was it organic throughout the team? Was it because of, I guess, the circumstances that you sort of talked about, and how much to heart and how much love, that the country wrapped around them? Was there something in particular that made this interview series and then the doco itself really go deep?
Yeah, and I think it is organic. Nothing like this can be forced, right? It has to be natural. And I think what we saw in New Zealand, like, yes, we're a very passionate rugby country, but we're also a country that when our team, they're held at such a high standard, the All Blacks, if they lose a game, the country turns on them. It's unbelievable, right? That's what our fans are like. So for an All Black team to come home from a World Cup not victorious, normally the nation would turn on that team. But in this instance, where the nation was proud of the efforts, they understood the lengths and depths this team went to perform strongly and to almost win the World Cup against the odds. So they came home and they were embraced by the nation as though they'd won the World Cup. And I think that was a process for the players that really helped them open up as well in the interviews following the World Cup. If they'd come home to a negative reception from fans, you'd be closed off, right? But they're welcomed in. And the nation's proud of them. So I think that really helped them with the process of opening up their feelings and reflections on what was an amazing World Cup tournament.
One last thing I wanted to wrap up on. Last time we caught up in person was actually at SEAT last year in Salt Lake. You attended the SEAT reboot. And you did come, and Josh Barney talks about going to SEAT with intention and, having something in mind you want to look at. You obviously had NZR Plus in the front of your mind at SEAT last year when you were turning up, not far away from a launch. What were some of your, I guess, takeaways and some of your key learnings from last year?
Yeah, so for me, I think the key thing with SEAT, and I think it's probably comparable to my contemporaries in Australia as well, right? We're down the bottom of the world. We see kind of American sports as being the absolute pinnacle in terms of their fan engagement, their content, their social media, everything they do in that space. But I never have any interaction with contemporaries or anyone in that space. To go to SEAT and then be immersed with people from the NFL, NHL, MLB, these major American sporting leagues, the teams and venues, it was incredible, right, to rub shoulders with those people for a couple of days and form some deep connections. And even a couple of weeks ago, I've got so many business cards from the NFL, NHL. Even a couple of weeks ago, I reached out to someone, that I met a year ago. And so you find these kind of common grounds and we kind of learn from each other. And for me, the best thing is it's the networking opportunities. It's what you learn from your contemporaries. And I kind of think being stuck down in New Zealand, I don't know if I'm doing things, if we're doing things, cutting edge, but then, we talk to people and like, well, that's amazing. I'm going to do that too. So I'm like, people learning things from me as well, as much as I'm learning from other people. So that's the best thing. Unfortunately, I can't make it this year. It's in Las Vegas. I think the Hangover films had too many sequels already. Doesn't need another one with me there. But look, it'll be an incredible time. And I just encourage anyone out there working in the sports tech space, social media venues, to get along to SEAT. It's an incredible networking opportunity. You're going to meet contemporaries. You're going to have people to bounce ideas off. And then for the next, for the remainder, who knows, the next few years, you're going to have contacts you can call on. So I hope to get back again one day. It won't be this year, but certainly I encourage anyone to get along and attend SEAT. It's an incredible few days.
And I do think one of the things I do agree on is that networking piece, but then also realising, there is a lot of similarity with what everyone does in all different parts of the world. We're all working with different audiences. We're all trying to solve the same problems, getting cheeks in the seats, engaging our fans, growing our audiences. And also, we're doing it with really highly passionate, engaged fan bases. Here you are managing the channels for the All Blacks, a globally renowned brand, doing all of these cool things. There's always something that you're doing in your part of, whether it be New Zealand, Australia, or in the US, that is unique, or you think is everyone must be doing it, that other markets are not. And I use the phrase "steal with pride" a lot. Hey, how can you take things from other markets and adapt them for yours? I'm sure there were conversations where you explained, "Oh yeah, we did this. We did this documentary with the All Blacks and it did really well." Or if you were at SEAT this year, you'd be talking about how you're working with Dude Perfect, and people would be leaning in because a lot of teams and leagues are trying to figure out that content creator piece, that influencer, fan transfer, if we can call it that, to sort of how do you sort of talk to those markets. So Yeah, never attend a conference, especially seat, and think, oh, I've got nothing to share. Always be sharing your story with a lot of pride, because there's always other people that can learn from what you're doing.
Absolutely. I think when you're kind of in the wheel as such, you don't realise, you become quite blasé about what you're doing, but everyone's doing cool stuff. Everyone's doing different things. So just that learning opportunity from other people is just incredible, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. I want to get to the Sports Geek Closing 5. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Yeah, I do. So it kind of etched in my memory, really, and it's attending Wellington rugby games with my dad at Athletic Park, which is an old stadium. It no longer exists. It's now a retirement village, but it was a 45,000-seat stadium, old wooden slat seats. It was in the middle of suburbia. So I've got a few memories etched in my head, and the main one is, it'd be a couple of mile walk to the ground with this throng of energetic and passionate crowd, and walking in this big vibe of energy as such to the game. And then I don't remember much about the games, but the halftime hot dog with sauce dripping down. And then the big thing was post-game as a kid having a little autograph book and being allowed to run on the field and get autographs and looking up at these players and thinking they're superheroes, they're larger than life, these players. I remember looking up and thinking, gosh, these are literally cartoon characters. They're huge, and that's kind of etched in my memory for life. So I think having those moments when fans at a young age can interact one-on-one with players, get an autograph, those are things that can last for a lifetime and really create fandom.
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking about things there that were happening organically that we are now, as sports marketers, trying to recreate or create as part of fan experience, whether they be a walk to the stadium, and they're all sort of things that people are trying to adapt to their game day that, in some cases in the past years were happening organically. You mentioned hot dogs there, but do you have a favourite food or a favourite food memory at a sports event?
Yeah, oh gosh, I'm going to say hot dogs again, but it's a different hot dog. So when I say hot dog at the stadium, it's, what would you call it, a corn dog, I guess, in New Zealand, right? But my favourite food memory in stadium is New York Yankees and just a classic Americana experience, eating an American hot dog with all the trimmings, all the sauces at Yankee Stadium with, I think it was a Budweiser, American beer. It was like, I just remember thinking, you cannot get more American. Yankee Stadium, baseball, hot dog, beer. It's the most American experience ever. Yeah.
Definitely. What's the first app you open in the morning?
First app, I don't know if I should be embarrassed to say this, but it's still Wordle, actually. I got on that Wordle buzz early days, and I'm still on it. It's the first thing I do. It's a bit of an addiction. So I'm straight on Wordle. But after that, I'll have to say NZR Plus, because we've also got not just content drops, we've got news. So if you want any of your news content, NZR Plus should be your first app in the morning.
So, I mean, now the question is when are you having an NZR Plus Wordle? Like, that seems to be the collab that you should be doing. Because there is an Australian rules version called Warple, which is you've got to come up with an AFL player's name. So there you go. That's probably your next thing.
There we
Apparently,
go.
New York Times, 35% of its traffic these days is actually games. So
wow, yeah.
It is a burgeoning piece.
And another, reverting back to Seed again, but, learning last year about the impact of mobile games as well through Arcade and Tradable Bits as well. And we've started to have conversations with those outfits. And certainly NZR Plus, that's the evolution, is moving to gamification. So, no, we'll add Wordle to the mix for sure.
All right. Is there someone that you follow? It might be someone on social, might be an author, that the podcast listeners should follow, and why?
Yeah, and I'll just say this because I think a lot of your listeners might not be, in tune with rugby as such, or might not know a lot about rugby. But I'd say if you're going to follow one athlete, it would be Ardie Savea, who is one of the more prominent All Blacks. He's a great personality. He's amazing at community building. So, for example, Ardie, he'll just put a Instagram out. He'll put a reel out, a message out, and say, "Hey, I'm going for a run in 2 hours here at this ground. Come and join me." And then he'll have 100 people turn up and he'll be going for a run with this big crowd of people, right? And he does that kind of stuff all the time. He just played 6 months in Japan, just returned to New Zealand for the All Black season. And his kind of insights on Japanese culture were just kind of unmatched, right, in terms of the food, the customs, the way of life in Japan. So he really lifted the lid on that. And I'd just encourage anyone out there, if you don't follow any rugby players, follow Ardie Savea. He'll just give you a great insight on rugby. And he's a real great example of building a community around you.
And do you think, going back to the documentary piece, do you think this generation of players coming through that have grown up and have seen the authenticity works on social, if they sort of show their real selves and they don't have that pressure of, I've got to be this stereotype of rugby player online, I'm only showing myself in the gym and I'm only showing myself in this certain light, and they're sort of showing some of that vulnerability, but really showing their real authentic self has actually lent itself to make things easier for your content team, your documentary team, to actually dig in on who they really are?
It has, 100%. I think if you go back 10 years, it would have been so hard to make a documentary like this. But now, organically, players are now taking their lead from what you see with NFL stars, with NBA stars, right? They're opening up, and it's not for every player, as it shouldn't be, but, they're opening up their world to fans. And as soon as fans, they know people as people, they're going to start to, for one, if you have a bad game, you're not going to give that person a bit of stick online because you know that person, right? If anything, you're going to leap to their defense. But also, when they're playing, you're going to watch them. You're going to tune into that game to watch that person play. So I think players now have a huge role in terms of being marketers for the game now, which they perhaps haven't been in the past, but now that they are, in terms of the way they present themselves online and growing fandom in the game. Yeah. But no, I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
It definitely gives fans another reason to connect with their story, or even it might be the reason that they do become fans. It's got nothing to do with rugby. They do, follow, a rugby player for their Japanese travel tips, and then they realize, he plays rugby as well. Oh, I might watch in this game because he's a good guy on Insta. It's a really, it's something that is developing in that athlete marketing space, and the more that the athlete sort of shares who they really are and some of the commonalities they might have. Oh, I didn't realize, that player also plays the same video games as me, or watches the same TV show as me, or, has the coffee the same way. Like, you never know why fans, they like to identify with their heroes. It's a long way from, your only interaction was with, one player and a scribble on a notebook. You're getting to learn so much about the players these days.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, you become effectively their friend, online. You have a real friendship with that player, even though you don't know them personally. And that's when, I think I kind of use the example quite a bit, but, we've got a bit of a tall poppy culture in New Zealand where if teams or players perform badly or make a mistake, often they get shut down pretty quickly online and the trolls are going to come in. But now we're seeing with players like Ardie Savea, that doesn't happen to them. They've got a community around them that defends them and lifts them up when something bad might happen. So that's the power of building those communities around you. Definitely.
It's always an advantage to have your own digital cheer squad. Like you said, they're there to cheer you on, but they're also there to defend you. Lastly, I always ask people what social media platform is your MVP, and you can answer that personally from your own point of view, but then also from a New Zealand Rugby point of view. What platform is the MVP?
Yeah, platform. I don't know if this is a boring answer, but 100% YouTube for me. So right now, look, the kings are landscape content, right? It's the second most visited website in the world. So you get your rich, deeply engaged content, longer form, 8 minutes longer, landscape, where you can reach a huge audience, deep engagement. But then you've got YouTube Shorts, where you can actually open it up now and reach a much wider audience. So it's interesting what's going on with TikTok now, and in terms of that uncertain future for TikTok, because YouTube obviously really pushing Shorts at the moment. So if we look at our metrics, our Shorts have gone crazy over the past 3 to 4 months, and that's where we've driven a lot of our subscribers from. So we're getting reach and we're getting subscribers over here on Shorts, and then we're getting our deeper engagement here with our landscape content. So you put the two together, and it's a pretty powerful platform right now. So for me, that's number one, undoubted, is YouTube for sure.
Definitely. I mean, and that's the thing. I think, what was it, 6-7 years ago, YouTube had that connected TV, rolling out those TV apps in every single new device. And year on year, the amount of consumption of YouTube, on TV keeps growing year on year. So it is just a real opportunity. I guess one last question, and it's sort of just prompted that. Have you, with such growth and with YouTube being such a focus, have you tested out Mr. Beast's YouTube analytics tool that he's building and effectively offering free to the world?
No, I haven't. I follow Mr. Beast, and my 6-year-old daughter loves watching Mr. Beast. So that's our thing. Every Sunday morning, we watch about an hour of Mr. Beast in bed on Sunday mornings. But I didn't know about this. It's just incredible what they do. he's just the absolute king of YouTube, right? So
he's just passed 277. I think he's now the most followed YouTuber. But yeah, the sports geek in me is looking at his. He's built an analytics tool for YouTube that if you've got your own YouTube channel, you should be running it. He is one of the best in the business in, testing out the length, the style, the calls to action, how to drive subscribers. And definitely at the moment, like as we've seen previously with all the different channels, when they pull back the red rope and say, come on through, which YouTube are currently doing with shorts, like that's obviously a time of high growth. You want to really be pushing your chips in then. And then seeing, how does that work with our long form, and their algorithm is, amazing. You start watching, something, whether it be the Dude Perfect, and then you click on something, an interview with Richard McCaw, and boom, then there's a whole bunch of rugby in your feed. So I'd be checking out. We'll put a link to it in the show notes, but definitely worth checking out. Andy, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. If someone wanted to reach out to you and say, hey, I enjoyed the podcast, can we connect? What's the best place to do so?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn, I'd say. Just Andrew Burt on LinkedIn. So give me a follow there and reach out. Yeah, for sure.
No problems. We will put a link in the show notes. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Sean. All the best. Thank you.
Looking to help your digital or sponsorship team? Book in for a Pick My Brain session with Sean Callanan to help your team level up. Book now at sportsgeekhq.com/pickmybrain.
Thanks again to Andy Burt. You can follow him on X, AndyBurt2012, and connect with him on LinkedIn. I always share the podcasts on LinkedIn, either with a little bit of a preview snippet and a bit of a shout out. So please reach out to him. You can find this episode at sportsgeekhq.com/380. Big part of this episode was understanding your fan journeys, and that's exactly what the Digital Dollars pillar, Know Your Distribution, is all about. Understanding all the different distribution platforms you have available. Just like Andy described in driving fans to NZR Plus, you need to look at the content that you're developing and how you want to optimize it for the different platforms to get the best result for that platform, but also to move your fans to that next phase, either in fandom or to another platform where you might be able to consume a longer form. So whether that's developing it for TikTok, for YouTube Shorts, for Instagram Reels, what's right for Facebook, taking that piece of content from your Know Your Content pillar, but then figuring out how to best use the platforms you have available, and then also look at those destinations where that longer form content might be consumed. In the case of New Zealand Rugby, they want to send everyone to NZR Plus, but it might be sending people to your broadcaster to watch a piece of long form. It might be going to your YouTube channel, or it might be going to your app and to your owned video sites on your website or on your app. Understanding that and understanding what levers to pull on your social media platforms and on your distribution platforms, the ones that you might own, like email is another one, is exactly what Know Your Distribution pillar is about. So if you want to have a review of how you and your team are using all the distribution platforms available to you across social media and across the own channels, please give us a call, because it all depends on your goals, your local goals, your national goals, or international goals, if that is the case, like New Zealand Rugby growing an international audience. And one of the conversation points at Seed Conference, as Andy said, will be a bunch of those discussions around growing fandom, deepening fandom, taking fans along that fan journey, taking them through that fan funnel that you've prescribed. I'd love to see you there. You can use the code SportsGeek for a 10% discount. For this one case, it is one word. Normally SportsGeek is 2 words, but when it's a code, it's 1 word. Go to seedconference.com. I'd love to see you there in Las Vegas, June 23 to 26. And lastly, thanks to Nick Sortner from Eden Park for sending me this rugby jumper. I thought it was appropriate to wear it during this outro. If you listen to this as an audio point of view, just imagine me in a black and white rugby top. But thank you again to Nick, and thank you again to Andy for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate each and every guest that comes on and shares their time and insights. Until next time, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Do you get Sports Geek news? Sean Callanan analyzes the latest sports business articles for you weekly. Sign up at sportsgeekhq.com. Want to help drive more revenue from your digital efforts? Book a time for a call. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call.